whirling his aim towards another clump of gobblers, so named for their tendency to eat just about anything with their shadow glass teeth, their beady little eyes moving about with frenetic madness of a fly caught in a jar. Adeline gripped the trigger tight, his calves still burning, ankles screaming in pain as he put weight on it. A cascade of metal sprayed forth from the fondly named spitter, ripping apart the earth and the gobblers, their acidic blood sizzling against the torn ground harmlessly, far from any of the soldiers' fight. "We should get injured more often," he yelled over the screaming of the machine, the smell of smoke wafting up to his nose as the powder christened each bullet's journey through the battlefield. "We should get injured more often," he yelled over the screaming of the machine, the smell of smoke wafting up to his nose as the powder christened each bullet's journey through the battlefield. Udger stood waiting, a massive belt of ammo in one hand, well, the only hand he had left. Old Lion operated a spitter to his right, enchanted by the spell blades to launch explosive rounds that pounded the earth wherever they landed. One had to be experienced in order to be allowed to use them. He saw with dismay that Lion was slaughtering wave after wave of gobblers, their remains a mess of blood, fur, and limbs dissolving to the ground as the old man coughed, looking over at him. The old man grinned, knowing Adelaine's thoughts, and he scowled in response. "No need to be cross, son. Give it another 20 years and maybe you'll be able to keep up with me." "Huger, feed me another line," he said in response, carefully watching the movement of the next wave of gobblers. He dinged one in the eye and it went down hard, half of its head missing. With a flick of the wrist, he swapped to another target, then another, abandoning the volley for a concentrated, precise attack designed to maximize his rounds. Gobbler after gobbler went down, their fearsome fangs the only remnant upon the battlefield. While he himself would never dream of spending nights in some dusty hall reading, of all things, he had come to appreciate the benefits of having those who did such a noble task. It certainly beat having to wear those heavy overcoats in order to avoid having your skin burned and peeled off by the vermin's vile ichor. These devices were the products of such efforts, and their effect upon the tides was well received. Adeline smiled as he saw the explosions cease, the line of gobblers nearing the defensive line of men and women below. He turned to gloat to the old-timer, but the man had already drawn a crossbow and begun aiming carefully, shaking his head. A few cloud terrors streaked inside the invisible dome, nimbly avoiding their unseen death. He wondered how such information was passed on to each new generation of abyssal fiends. Did they hold classes to tell all the young creatures to watch out for the gigantic invisible dome of pure arcane energy? Within the metal bunker, he felt safe, waving to the flaring beasts as they circled about aimlessly before being picked off by a storm of bolts. Normally, fighting the flying monstrosities, pale as their namesakes and without eyes, was a nasty affair, but in the clear, cloudless sky of the defense zone, they had nowhere to hide. The Black Eyes were eviscerating anything that came near, fighting the larger creatures at the mouth of the entrance, while the lesser fiends navigated around them carefully, hissing and roaring as they passed, yet avoiding them all the same. A shard of the Leviathan was occupying the attention of 2 Black Eyes, a pack of Shadowstalkers, another 3 or 4. And one Black Eye, wearing what looked to be an authentic ebony visage, was... "That's the pride of Sidrophinade, I tell you true," said Lion, resting his crossbow. Ada raised an eyebrow at him, but the old man shook his head. "Tide's over. The beasts know when they're beat. Once Abyssal Captain Helash finishes what he's doing there," he gestured, leaning against the wall and closing his eyes, "they'll run. Oh, they'll run." The lone Black Eye was a whirlwind with his buzzing lance. He fought a hulking shard, several Shadowstalkers, a host of gobblers, and even a few Rift Slammers. The man weaved between the creatures as if on a ballroom floor, mounting the shard, the thing giving a low roar that they could feel even from here, he quickly scampering up its back like a goat. As the thing's hands reached for him, he pushed off into the sky, the Shadowstalkers missing him by just a hair, sprouting from a shadow that lay atop the shard, and he came down with his lance into the pack of gobblers, shredding them into a fine puree. Their blood splattered against the other creatures, causing them to recoil in pain as their flesh was melted away, and in the short window that he opened, he zipped from fiend to fiend, dispatching them with little flourish, but even so, the Black Eye oozed style. The concurrent deaths caused by the Black Eyes had an immediate, demoralizing effect upon the rest of the beasts, some already trying to retreat, the Sidrophan citizens below cheering in victory as they beat back their assailants. Huger gave a sigh of relief, putting down the belt with a curse, but Adeline felt as if something was off. He watched Lion, the gray-haired man, frowning out the window. The Black Eyes seemed to notice it as well, watching the creatures run past them, not even bothering to attack. "What is it, old-timer?" asked Adeline seriously. "I don't know, son," he said. "Just a feeling. Only one more week left on this shore leave, but I'd say the worst is yet to come." "What makes you say that?" "I went to Hotakachi once with the rite of departure. I ever tell you that?" said the man, turning to him. He could hardly mask his shock, eyes bulging as he said, "You?" The man was as hydrophone as one could get. Walking to the territory of one of their most staunch enemies just didn't seem like something a man would do. He nodded. Back in my younger days when I still thought there were things more important than this," he said, slapping the window meaningfully. "You ever heard of a tidal wave?" Adeline shook his head. Each word was familiar on its own, but together he wasn't quite sure what it meant. "They're these massive waves that come in and can travel miles inland. Destroys everything in its path. Saw one myself while I was down there. They knew it was coming before I did. Imagine that. A massive wave capable of devastating all in its path, but you can't see it coming." "So, how'd they know it was on the way?" he asked, curious. "It's something to do with science. I didn't understand all of it," he said gruffly. "But by the time you see the wave coming, it's too late. Apparently, before it comes, the water pulls back all the way far out, leaves the shore nice and dry. After that, well, you've got time to run as far as you can and hide somewhere nice and high, or otherwise pray to the Leviathan." "Are you saying that's what these tides have been?" said Aid, pointing to the receding wave of creatures. "You think something bigger's coming?" He hoped not. He had managed to live 25 long years without being in a flood, and guardian willing, he'd keep that streak up. The man nodded. "I've been in 3 floods in my life, Aid," the man said, holding up the respective amount of fingers. "And every time, this is how they started. Well, it's because those rumors are true about the last batch of Ebony Guardsmen, or because Lord Saren, blessed may he be," the man intoned, nodding his head in respect, "wishes to test us. Who can say? Alls I know is I would sleep lightly from now on, and save your strength. You'll need every last bit of it." Adeline felt terror, real terror, grip his heart so suddenly he fell to his knees, gasping. Old Lione was there first, holding him upright, Hugo laying a gentle, solitary hand on his other shoulder. Memories of ruined citizens screaming in terror as they were wheeled past him to the asylums haunted his mind, limbs missing, long scars running down their bodies. He shivered as he tried to regulate his breathing, the 2 men saying nothing despite the weakness he showed. They knew. They understood. He felt ill at their empathy, and furious. One day, they would betray him. Everyone always did. I'm fine," he said, brushing their hands off as he rose. It was normal to be fearful of a flood. Few men survived, and fewer still were able to live as they once had afterwards. Entire noble houses had been snuffed out in the effort to keep them back, and you never knew who was a true coward, who would commit the unforgivable sin and let the Leviathan in. He looked out at the black eyes, they still watching the massive creatures retreat. One turned towards him, the cold, obsidian gaze holding him fast. And if he was a coward, the whirring blades of the black eyes would be the last thing that he ever heard. Vern looked up at the bunker, the hoodlum's gaze meeting his. A curious bunch, he and his band of misfits. He turned from him, shaking his weapons clean of the gobbler blood, sliding a gloved hand across the substance. It crackled and hissed at him as he slid it off, but his blade remained intact. Some of his unit were doing the same, although most of them were busy making sure the shard would be unable to reform. The abyssal captain was doing the same, except alone, and Vern leapt across the stampede of fiends to aid him. He chopped along with his commander, slicing into the thick, scaled flesh of the massive corpse. It was important to do it quickly after death, before it could harden further. If one waited too long, the only substance that could cut through it would be shadow glass, which they almost never used. "We'll need to set out in a few hours," said Helosh, slicing apart one of the veins. A dead shard usually had 6 or 7. Destroy all of them, and they couldn't reform. Leave even one, and you'd have the same massive spawn of the Dark God to contend with. Yet, it was no more than he had expected. Vern glanced over at the others of his unit, the men making a point not to look at him and the commander. "They'll try to kill me. And you." Helosh snorted. "You think I don't know that, boy? Let them try. Mercy of the Leviathan. What a disgrace this whole affair has been," he finished with a shake of his head, pulling back his lance and severing another vein. Vern still had trouble finding the things, the veins cleverly hidden within the intricate insides of the shard. The thing reeked of blood and death, a rank mixture that would have made him gag if not for the steadying warmth of earth. I don't understand, he said, finding one of the veins finally, putting his blade against it and activating it, the whirring shearing through it after a moment's resistance. Why not tell the Free Lords, or House Larian, or anybody? The Free Lords already know. So does Larian. Protocol demands I take responsibility for this. It's not the first time, son. It won't be the last. Damned nobles, always the worst ones to raise. Not like you. He nodded towards Vern, and he felt a swell of pride rush through him. Nobility don't struggle enough. I've half a mind to let this flood wash over that damned house. Not that it would do much, the man said, trailing off with a... Vern had no idea what that was supposed to mean, as he searched through the remains, finding another vein. He made quick work of it, and Helash must have found the last, for with a thrust downward, the creature's body rumbled. No warning was necessary as they jumped together towards the rest of the Ebony Guard, the shard exploding behind them. Nasty things, shards. And that was just when they were dead. Helash landed behind him, and Vern rushed to the already formed line of guardsmen, turning about and waiting for his command. All right. You may have noticed the activity lately is the textbook behavior preceding a flood. You will return to the barracks, refit, and repair your equipment, and prepare to leave within 2 hours. We ride for the Black Forest and Twilight Lake. If you've any goodbyes or last meals you're looking forward to, make them. First recruit Vern, you will attend me and I'll report to the Free Lords. The rest of you are dismissed. Until my eyes have been taken, my breath stolen, and my will broken, I remain. Even still, we remain. They bellowed in unison. They turned to leave, but Vern faced them and said, You have no right to those words, cravens. They paused, tense for a moment, but one of them waved them onwards, and they left, the remaining one unmasked, and Vern did the same. It was Carlea, the one who had placed second to him in evaluations. Hatred in her eyes burned for far more than just that, however. You think the commander will be enough to save you, don't you? She laughed harshly, mockingly. He's old, and you're a fool. You'll die alone in the wilds, the Leviathan free to take your soul and mash it in tiny bits. For what? Honor? Be smarter than this, if your putrid blood is capable of such. He had thought her pretty once, her red, curly hair a rarity inside of him. But knowing the true of her character now, however, he found her repulsive. Few things in this world survive the weathering of time. Your beauty will fade. Our bodies will shrivel and die, and your riches shall occupy someone else's coffers. Honor remains, he said, standing. She snorted. Then you will die honorable, fool. Pray to the Leviathan, she said, donning her mask once again, and her voice was distorted by the device. Pray, first recruit. Pray the Leviathan favors honor over strength. And she turned, leaping off with great bounds towards the barracks. One of the demolition vehicles rolled towards them, and Vern moved with Helash out of its path, the machine hissing and bouncing as it paved over the ground where the shards had exploded. That went well, said Helash, and Vern shook his head. I don't understand. You keep saying that I must be patient, that I must wait. But their treason is blatant, brazen. Why have they not been executed? There are things you do not yet understand, Stedlin, about the world and about the way things are. Helash unmasked himself, and Vern did the same. The man's hard face seemed to crack slightly. His hair was clipped tight in the fashion of most Hydrophan men, though it was streaked with lines of silver. He wasn't tired. The men and women of the Ebony Guard could not be tired. But he was lesser. In some way Vern could not place. He was lesser. Then explain to me what it is I do not understand, said Vern, slamming his weapon into its sheath. Is that so hard? Yes, the old guardsman said wryly. But I don't have the time nor the inclination. To the overwatch of the Twin Stars, he ordered, remasking and bounding off in one motion, and Vern followed shortly after. So many secrets. He had joined the Ebony Guard because he had thought that it would make things simpler, and instead it had only overturned his entire world. Lies and intrigue, betrayal and death. For a Hydrophan, these things were natural, but the Ebony Guard was supposed to be different. They were the heroes of legend, infallible, unbreakable. They carried the honor of Hydrophan. Mortal men who were something more, who spit in Leviathan's face and stabbed the Dark God in the foot, even as their light was snuffed out. Growing up, as the son of a shoemaker and a seamstress, he had thought that this was the path he was destined to take to raise his family status. It didn't take long for them to reach the Overwatch, leaping atop buildings and running along the aerial pathways made to expedite the men of the guard. Statues and alcoves placed just so they could sustain the momentum and reach their destinations with alacrity. With the aid of Earth, which felt more and more familiar with each day, he was able to see Lord Hyacinthe of House Larian looking down over them, accompanied by Free Lord Urir. Hilosh stepped next to him, crouching, coiling, and shot into the air, far above to the top of the Overwatch above. His mastery of the arcane source was greater than Vern's, and besides that, he had never attempted such a leap. The Abyssal Commander seemed to reach the top with ease, landing lightly on his feet, turning around to look at him expectantly. He did as his superior did, crouching, gathering himself. With a quick exhalation, he simply let go. Color and wind rushed by as he ascended into the sky, the balcony above approaching rapidly. Then, alarmingly, he felt himself begin to slow, and he drew his weapon reflexively. "And what good will this do me?" he asked himself. Then he saw his path upwards. Just as gravity began to work against him, he flared his earth as much as he could handle, feeling as if his body would simply snap from how taut it was. Then he whirled himself around, back to the building, and performed a backstroke, as if he was swimming. The strength he held, superhuman and unnatural, rent the air, displacing it, pushing him backwards towards the Overwatch. That was hyperbole, however, as he only traveled a few feet towards the building, but his fall had been adjusted, and that was all that he needed. He rammed his blade into the building, right into one of the crevices he had seen. It stuck, blessedly, and hung from it, one hand dangling as he looked down. While he hadn't quite made it to the top, he had still jumped perhaps 10 stories in the air. That was a new best for him. He began to swing parallel to the building, gathering speed and power before he did a complete circle along it, yanking out of the wall and shooting himself into the air, twisting his body to grip the balcony, scrambling up and coming to his feet shakily, the 3 men staring at him patient.
"This is the Stedlin boy?"
asked Urir, eyes appraising him like a piece of meat. The Free Lord was no noble, raised from the common populace, but even at age 60, the man's arms bulged with muscle in his soft black robes, the collar lined with white. Like all Sidrothan officials, however, his white and bleach-pale hair was clipped tight. The Free Lord stepped forward and stuck out his hand, not smiling, but his hard face softened ever so slightly.
"Good to meet you, son."
Vern shook his hand, honored and somewhat starstruck for a moment. "And I you, Free Lord." The man's grip was solid, real. It was difficult not to feel admiration for someone who had fought against the forces of Leviathan for so long. He flicked his eyes to the high seat of House Larian and bowed his head before sticking his hand out. "Greetings, Lord Hyacinthe." They had already met previously. It was impossible not to encounter the house while in the first offense. The man shook his hand briefly, his grip strong as well, but he said nothing, eyes dismissing his presence. "And why are you here, Hilosh? You know what is to come. The rest of your order have already begun their preparation."
"I have a request, Free Lord Urir," said Hilosh respectfully, ignoring Lord Hyacinthe, the man going rigid at being disregarded so openly. "Excuse Recruit Stedlin from the operation today."
Hyacinthe frowned thoughtfully, studying Vern as if suddenly made aware of an insect upon his arm, and the Free Lord raised a brow in confusion.
"And why is that?"
Vern shared his confusion. This was the first he was hearing of his
"Because I invoked the right of sacrifice,"
he said, voice steel. All 3 men were silent, stunned. Vern's mind was racing. Why would he do such a thing?
"You are aware of the consequences of invoking this right under these conditions,"
said the Free Lord slowly, obviously unsure if Hilosh was in his right mind.
"I am."
"I see," said the Free Lord, very much still befuddled, scratching his behind absently.
"As a watcher of the Dark Mountain, I recognize your right and absolve Vern Stedlin of his duty."
He paused again and offered Hilosh one last chance to reconsider.
"If this is what you wish to do."
"Commander," said Vern urgently, putting a hand on the man's shoulder. "See reason. What has come over you? You need me out there." The man turned to him, giving him a hard look.
"No, I need you here, First Recruit."
"Why?" he demanded.
"Soon," he said. "I will explain everything soon."